Join host Jennifer Wyman for the premiere of Dialogue Under Pressure, a multi-episode series featuring conversations with the editors and authors of Stress Test, the Israel-Hamas War and Christian-Jewish Relations. In this first episode, host Jennifer speaks with Holocaust scholar and one of the principal architects of Stress Test, John K. Roth.
October 7th was hideous, and what happened was horrible. So I'm not trying to minimize that, but there have been a lot of horrible things that have happened in Israel and in Gaza in the past 70 years. So why did this conflict, why did you feel the need for this book because of this conflict?
October 7th, 2023, the Hamas attack against Israel immediately provoked responses that likened it to an event that was the worst disaster in Jewish history since the Holocaust. And that theme went viral, I would say. It was amplified. And then very quickly after October 7th, the state of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, mounted a counterattack against Hamas, which quickly expanded into Gaza and affected the Palestinian population. So within a matter of days, certainly in a matter of weeks, we had a conflagration in the Middle East, particularly focused on the Gaza Strip, that for the Israelis raised images, history related to the genocide against the European Jews perpetrated by Nazi Germany on the one hand, and on the other, the world began to see the response from Israel carried out in a way that was predicated on self-defense against what was considered to be an existential threat to the state of Israel. We saw an assault in response that quickly began to have high numbers of civilian casualties. And the world was riveted to this. And then it escalated, and it got worse and worse and worse.
You said something yesterday, as we were signing off, that struck me. Is dialogue really going to be effective, and do we need to maybe retreat to our corners and kind of lick our wounds and then approach with clearer heads? And I am of two minds about that, because I always believe dialogue is the answer, but when you look at Netanyahu's administration and his behavior and the dialogue that you see on the UN floor, and that's dialogue and nothing's happening. So what do you see as a way out of that?
Okay, I'm going to back up and say just a little bit about how Carol Rittner and I decided to put together a book that is called Stress Test. It's about the Israel-Hamas war and Christian-Jewish relations. I would say that within 2 months of October 7th, 2023, Carol and I were having one of our Zoom conversations, which we have frequently, and almost immediately we said to each other, we ought to do something to foster some conversation and dialogue about this war. And our concern was that we knew that this was going to create a rupture between Christians and Jews. And so we were looking for a way to begin to prevent that rupture from growing, and if possible, to heal it. And our approach was to say, well, before we engage in dialogue, Jewish and Christian, we need to get some ducks in a row among Christians about what are Christians thinking, and in particular, we were concerned about what are American Christians thinking, because it became clear by, December of 2023, and it's even more clear now, that as American taxpayers, we are all complicit in the massive destruction that has taken place in Gaza. So Carol and I said, let's see if we can get a group of American Christians to deal with some hard questions that are important for dialogue, if dialogue is going to take place between Jews and Christians in a stress test situation that is being inflamed by this war. So that's what we did in the book. Now, in the process, we had to think about what dialogue is. So I'll say just a word about that from my point of view. First of all, a few thoughts about what dialogue is not. Dialogue is not a negotiation. It is not an attempt to get, an agreement on a deal of some kind between people. It's not an argument. Dialogue is not about arguing to try to win, one point of view and defeat another. I would say that dialogue is not a debate. It isn't like two sides standing up and one side saying, okay, here's my position, and the other side saying, here's mine. And I would say dialogue is not even a discussion necessarily, unless we nuance what we mean by that. To me, what dialogue involves, first of all, is a lot of listening. And it involves a lot of question asking. And it involves, thirdly, sharing points of view. So if I'm going to start a dialogue with you on a fraught topic, I guess the first thing I would want to say is, what are you feeling, Jennifer? What are you thinking? What are you concerned about? I'd want to hear from you. And then, I might have some follow-up questions for you. I might want to say, well, can you explain what you're saying, or can you clarify it? And before I might want to jump in with anything except questions and listening from my side, I would emphasize those features first. And then you might say, well, John, okay, I've told you some of what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling about this war. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What questions do you have? And I think that's where dialogue goes. It's about those kinds of exchanges. And the purpose of it is to go, I use the phrase, to go deep down, to try to get beyond, the surface, and to do something that has encounter and engagement in it. Now, what's the purpose of this? Well, that's something that kind of remains to be seen. My sense is that if you and I have a real dialogue, we don't know quite what's going to happen. That's one of the strengths of dialogue, that it's indeterminate. It doesn't foreclose anything. It opens things up. But what I would hope is that the net result would be that we would be better friends.
I agree, obviously, with everything you're saying. Active listening, with the goal of understanding. But I think when you come to the table and tensions are high and tempers flare, that it just becomes a shouting match, somebody being heard over somebody else. Let me cut you off because what I'm saying is more important. And so I think in a utopian world, in a perfect bubble, that's what dialogue should do, what you're saying. I'm questioning whether, is there any possibility for that kind of a roundtable discussion right now?
Could I jump in here, Jennifer and John? John, without being too critical, and as I've listened to what you've had to say about dialogue, what you've had to say sounds to me more like psychotherapy. How do you feel? What are your views? And I tell you what I feel, and then I say, okay, now I've told you what I feel. How do you feel? I mean, it seems to me that dialogue is something far more substantive. I wonder if you could react to that.
Sure. When I make the point about asking Jennifer how she feels, it's really about what is she thinking? What are her views about something? I mean, I'm not asking her to tell me, that she's upset or she's concerned. She might be, but when I say, how are you feeling? Behind that question is that we're talking about an issue. We're talking about a war. So when I'm asking her to tell me what she's feeling, I'm asking her to tell me what she thinks about this war, what she believes is the right interpretation of it, what she thinks is um, in the area of misunderstandings that she finds people having. That's what I'm trying to get at. I maybe used the wrong word to describe it. It's not psychotherapy. I'm a philosopher, for goodness sakes. I'm interested in arguments, points of view, truth, evidence, um, falsehoods, distortions, and all the rest of it, much more than I am about, something that would be in the realm of psychotherapy.
No, I understand that, but then I think the point you just made, language is important. I mean, how one engages rather than saying, how do you feel or what do you feel about this? Say, what do you think about the war?
Well, look, it could go like this. I mean, Jennifer might ask me about the war, and she might say, "How are you feeling?" I might say, "I'm angry. I'm pissed off." Okay, then the follow up is, "Well, what are you angry about? Why are you upset?" Um, well, I'm upset because, and now you would be getting into the things like, because there are so many casualties, because there's so much violence. And then we'd be ready to talk about, okay, what do we do about that? That's what we'd be talking about. I might say, I want the violence to stop. Jennifer might say, well, you can't stop the violence because there are existential threats at stake. We have to defeat people. So it very quickly goes from, um, I think emotion can actually be a way to access quickly the substance.
Well, I think you're right, John, because if you were to ask me how I feel about what's going on and since its inception, I was at first livid. I was um in righteous indignation quickly grew to horrible rage, and then somewhere along the way it settled into a kind of hopelessness, and it seems so there's no going back at this point, and there's no band-aid for that bullet wound. It's too much now, and that hopeless, impotent anger that's become helplessness, that feels like, why bother talking? They've already done the bad thing.
Well, I would argue back, and here I'll use the word argue, mindful of Carol's warning that words are important, but it is a kind of argument in a way. I would say at the very moment when hopelessness emerges, when despair is growing, those are the very times when dialogue is even more important than before, because we know, I think, deep down, to use my phrase again, that despair and hopelessness are not the answer any more than more violence is the answer to the dilemmas that we're facing. Um, Neither Hamas nor the state of Israel are going to achieve what is good and just and right by more violence. That would be something to talk about deep down with a dialogue partner. Do you agree with that? If somebody says no, then we'd have to explore that. Then I'd have to ask, well, why don't you? Um, so
Well,
this is where dialogue goes. Now, dialogue is not diplomacy. I mean, we have to get clear about what it isn't. Dialogue is not what happens at the UN. It isn't. It isn't the. It isn't policy making, but it may be helpful in all of those things. If a diplomatic relationship is taking place, it would sure help if the partners who are diplomats are capable of or have had dialogue with one another. So dialogue is not a panacea. It's not a solution. It isn't even a remedy, I would say, but it may be something that is very important for keeping human relationships, personal ones, even community ones, where possible, on a footing that enables some progress to be made that stops violence, killing, mayhem, suffering, and injustice.
I've got one last question for you, John, just as a follow-up. So at this point, at this stage of the game, do you still feel hope for a resolution?
I wouldn't use the word hope. I would say I can see what a resolution might look like. And it starts with my conviction that the state of Israel has to stop what it's doing, which, as we're sitting now, involves more destruction in the Gaza Strip, more settlements in the West Bank, and as we're hearing in the news literally this morning, a dynamic inside the state of Israel that is isolating Israel. And that's not good for anybody. So it starts with stopping what is happening, and then it requires, at some point along the line, a massive rebuilding in Gaza. It requires, I believe, in the long term, not giving up on a two-state solution. And I'm not hopeful that there will be a two-state solution, but I think that anyone who is looking at this situation realistically, as well as ethically, realizes that the Palestinians are not going away, the Israelis are not going away, and those people are going to have to live together, because it isn't going to work to kill them all. There has to be respect for the fact that Israelis and Jews have suffered in my lifetime mortal wounds. It has to be recognized that Palestinians in the Middle East in my lifetime have suffered mortal wounds, and they are occupying the same part of the world, and the only way forward is to figure out how to live together. More violence, more killing, more forcible relocations won't do it. We know this. I'm a Holocaust scholar. I know this from my study of the Holocaust. You know, Hitler's genocide was lethal, massively destructive, but it failed. And the state of Israel is part of the evidence of that. So we have to work in spite of the fact that the history is not over.
That wraps up part 1 of IPUB's October 7th Town Hall meeting. Thanks for spending this time with us as we unpacked the tough and timely ideas behind Stress Test, the Israel-Hamas war, and Christian-Jewish relations. A huge thank you to John K. Roth and Carol Rittner for sharing their insights, and to our hosts, Jennifer Wyman and Sandy Mayer, for steering such an honest and thoughtful conversation. This episode was brought to you by iPub Cloud International. If you'd like to learn more about the book or the ongoing dialogue it's inspired, visit us at ipubcloud.org. The conversation continues in Part 2, coming soon. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Until next time, take care and thanks for listening.